Aspergers Syndrome. Before he was a best-selling author, he tried a number of different things, all very successfully. He designed toys, he designed guitars, he worked with the band Kiss, and now he runs his own high-end BMW specialized automotive shop up in New England. So it is my great pleasure to bring tonight John Robison.
See there a number of fellow Aspergians in the crowd here. We have young ones and old ones and stuff. We got a special one in a suit up in front here. He's really cool. And so anyway, I want to say thank you all for coming here. I know some of you would have barely come here because you were critical of my views of New Jersey, reading my Facebook posts as I ride through the train in modern times. But, you know, actually, I had a number of interesting and memorable experiences here in New Jersey. You, have most of you, or many of you read my books, Look Me in the Eye and Be Different and stuff? Yeah, so the majority sort of generally know that story. You know, the first shows I did when I worked for Pink Floyd Sound Company were actually here in New Jersey. We had leased a sound system to the New Jersey Center for the Performing Arts, which is all the way up. It's up at the northern end of the New Jersey Turnpike, where that raceway is now, I guess. And the very first performances that we did with the 5-way sound system that I built for Pink Floyd were actually done in that venue. And so I'll always remember doing that because it was a really cool thing. I actually, you know, it's funny, I think of my memories of sound systems and rock and roll shows, and people say, well, you know, how was it, you know, with this musician and that musician, and you know, I don't remember the first thing about any of these musicians. All these people that sang through our sound equipment, I can't really tell you anything about the musicians, but I can tell you every little detail of how we mic'd the pianos and what we used for mixing consoles and what we had for amplifiers, what brand of speakers we had in which hall and stuff, and I can remember all the stuff that happened to me afterwards. I had a most memorable encounter that never made it into any of my books and stories, right here on the New Jersey Turnpike one night. I had done this concert down here with Meatloaf. Some of you probably remember Meatloaf, Paradise by the Dashboard Light and stuff. And so the show had ended, they broke the equipment down, and it's really late. It's probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and you know, I'm going north on the turnpike, and I realize I'm about to run out of gas. And I pull into one of those gas stations that you have down here. And one of the things about New Jersey, at least back then, I don't know if it's still true, is when you pulled into a gas station, they came out and they pumped your gas for you. That's right. And the people that did the pumping, boy, they were some surly specimens in here, especially at 3 in the morning in a truck stop. So anyhow, I pull in there, and there is this pimpy-looking dude with a hat, and he is in this white Eldorado convertible, and he pulls up to the pump, and there's this girl pumping gas, and some of you, I know, you're thinking, oh, girl pumping gas, you know, and poor thing out there at a truck stop at night. Well, it ain't that way. So anyhow, the pimp, he gets impatient, and the pimp starts blowing his horn. And I'm about 30 feet behind him, and the pimp starts hollering at her. And she turns around, and I would get a good look at her. She's got to be 300 pounds if she's an ounce. And she walks back to the car, and she reaches in there, and she grabs this guy with both hands, and she lifts him right out of this Eldorado and throws him on the ground and starts pounding on him. a circle, and you can see they're just about to start laying bets. And the pimp is like climbing under his car, and he's getting roasted by the exhaust. And I drove off, and I almost ran out of gas, having to go hunting for gas in New Jersey at 3 in the morning. And so some of you wonder what shaped my memories of your state, and it was things like that in the 1970s. But, you know, nothing bad really ever happened to me down here, and actually did have a lot of fun. And, you know, I tell people sometimes that one of the things I loved about doing music was a challenge of doing the different variety of shows, and how I would do a show one night, we'd have a guy like Jerry Rafferty, or we'd have a rock and roll guy like Meatloaf, and then the next night we'd have somebody like Barry Manilow or Melissa Manchester. And those events that I talked about, actually, they were at the Center for Performing Arts, and they were at venues in New Jersey. So they were they were right here in your state. And on this back here, I know that you go to like presentations sometimes with more legitimate people than me, and the people that put them on, they have PowerPoint presentations, and they're here with laser pointers and stuff. And so I have started carrying my own presentations with me. These are pictures of things that I have seen during my travels this summer. It's just stuff I've photographed, and it's just scrolling through strange things I saw. But anyway, there was another connection to New Jersey in there. So some of you might remember the band Frankie and the Teenagers. They did Why Do Fools Fall in Love in 1956. It was a huge, huge hit song. Millions and millions of records sold. And so even though I'm not in the business of producing or playing music, I now go out and photograph musicians. And I photograph, you know, fairs and carnivals and stuff. And I was photographing the Eastern States Exposition, which is a fair in New England, and Frankie and the Teenagers were playing. And, you know, people ask me sometimes what kind of music I actually liked, you know, because I get all this heavy metal with Kiss and Pink Floyd and stuff. And the people that I liked the most, they were the black soul and R&B bands, because those guys, they were just so good, you know. I would watch them rehearse, and they would just spend hours and hours and hours, and they would practice all these moves, would step out, they would do this and that, and they'd be, you know, dancing and stuff, and they'd sing in these perfect harmonies. And these guys, they just put their whole lives into that. And so I see that Frankie and the Teenagers are going to be performing. Well, these guys, they're in their 70s, and they've been playing this music for 50 years. And I tell the MC that I want to take the pictures, and he goes to tell one of the guys in the band that there's going to be a photographer photographing them. And he says, I'll bring you up on stage and introduce you to him. And he brings me up there, and he's this old guy in the back called a musical director. Well, they don't even have a musical director except in these soul bands. And the reason they have them is a lot of times you have different singers that sing in front of a band that plays off sheet music. And anyhow, the musical director, he like looks at me, and he looks at me again, and he says, son of a bitch, I remember you from Studio Instrument Rentals. Now, Studio Instrument Rentals was this place that I worked when I was just starting in rock and roll, and that was the Drifters rehearsing in like 1976. And I just couldn't believe this guy looks at me in the summer of 2011 and remembers 1976. So anyhow, you will see pictures of those guys just scrolling by the screen. So the smiling black dudes there, they're polished and gentlemanly and stuff, that are up there singing, that's them. You'll see them. And so if you wonder what kind of stuff I really love to do the most, then that was it. This here, some people wonder, they hear the phrase, I'm just a piano player in a whorehouse, and that was one of them that went by on the screen. Watch it, it's actually not, it was a piano player in the circus. But it's the same general idea. So anyway, I guess you are probably here to hear my latest ideas about Asperger's and autism and stuff like that. Pardon me, I'll pick up my shirt here. Sort of suspected. the shirt would be too much. But see, I've had all of this marital strife. You know, I had this one wife, Little Bear, and Little Bear turned on me, and I got divorced, and then I got married again, and then married life found her, and then I got married again after that, and so it was the third one who dressed me up, you know, and she armed me with a sweater and an iron shirt and stuff like that. If it was just me, I would be here in a short sleeve shirt and I would be more comfortable, but I know that I'm not wrinkled. I'm like better looking for all thanks to that. And, so anyway, I've had a lot of things go on since I wrote those books of mine. One of the things that I've really seen is I've seen this big change in myself, and I've started to see it in other people with autism. You know, I've gotten to know some of the other people that you might see, folks like Temple Grandin and Stephen Shore, and I see these young people like Alex Plank, who has the Wrong Planet website, and I'm really struck by the contrast in what I hear so often when I listen to parents and teachers. They all say to me, they say, I'm so afraid that these kids aren't ever going to grow up and be on their own, they're not going to be able to take care of themselves. And they say stuff like, well, you know, he's 21, and if he hadn't learned it by now, he probably isn't going to learn it. And of course, the implication is that by the time you're that age, you pretty much have learned everything you're going to learn. And you know, I sort of accepted that as true, really, for most of my life, because that's what, you know, we've probably all heard. You all probably heard that growing up. Except that now, I look at the tremendous change in my own life. You know, if any of you doubt that, you just think of how life was for me before I took up writing books and speaking to people. And, you know, it's just been a few years that I was a guy with really no friends, and I didn't really have much of a social life. I mean, I was, you know, commercially successful. I was always smart enough to make a go of it and you know, stay out of the gutter. But because of this Asperger thing, I never really knew how to behave, and I never knew what to say to people, and I didn't really have friends. People thought I was rude, obnoxious, and stuff. The thing is, they still think I'm rude and obnoxious, but now I have friends everywhere. It's really just the most magical thing. And I see that now there's these people that take pictures of me and stuff, and I can look at television footage of me 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And it's dramatically different. It's a huge change. And I look at that, and I think, you know, it's really important, more than I knew, for me to show that to parents and teachers and folks like you, because what you see in me is absolute proof that we keep learning and growing all our lives. And it may be true in the case of regular people that you can't teach old dogs new tricks. I mean, for all I know, a 50-year-old guy who's not autistic, maybe he is exactly the same when he's 55. But I know that I am surely very different. And it sort of makes sense, because people always said that this autism thing is a developmental delay. It doesn't mean that we never figure it out. And I just think it's a striking thing. And the more I see of that, the more I am motivated to go out and speak to people and spread that word. And the other thing that I'm really motivated to do, and I think this is really important also, is try and show people the kinds of tools that we are developing to make life better for folks like us. One of the things, you know, I think probably most everyone here tonight has some kind of personal stake in autism. Would that be fair to say? Probably most all of you. And so one of the things that I hear so often online, I hear that we're doing all this work for kids with autism serving on science boards. And I joined the Science Review Boards for the National Institutes of Health and Centers for Disease Control. I joined the Science Review Board for Autism Speaks. And I serve on medical ethics and policy panels now for the NIH. And one of my objectives in doing that was to do my best to steer our research dollars and our scientific efforts into work that was going to benefit. This thing just up and down?
Yeah, it's just changed.
It's all right. You can hear me in the back, right? Yeah, all right. Well, it's okay. So, anyhow, I was very interested in steering our research into work that would benefit the autistic population living today, as opposed to concentrating all our research dollars in very basic research into the biological or genetic foundations of autism, which may ultimately be valuable to know, but isn't going to do a single thing for any of you in this room or me. And so as I got started doing that, I first began to hear that we aren't doing anything for adults, and it sounded reasonable because I couldn't see anything for adults. But as I've gotten more involved in this research, what happens is, and this is really a cool thing, because I go out and I write and I speak, I get invited to join these different boards, these science boards. And when you join these science boards, all of a sudden it's like you're like an insider in a corporation. You know, you're looking at their secret designs for the stuff they're going to be selling next Christmas. And in the case of autism research, what you do on these science boards is you look at proposed pieces of research. People are asking you to fund something based on their initial experiments and ideas, and they're proposing to get a result in 2 or 3 years, and it'll be published in a scientific or medical journal a couple of years after that. So you read about these proposed studies probably 4 or 5 years before the general public will hear about them. And some of the stuff is really fascinating. And the great thing about it is, you know, when I started out, I was kind of like nothing. I was a high school dropout. I'm less of a high school dropout every day. The state of Texas has already given me a high school diploma because they thought I shouldn't be a high school dropout. I'm just waiting now for one of these colleges to give me a doctorate. But anyhow, the thing is, even if these professors and doctors and scientists wouldn't talk to a lowlife nothing like me, if I'd have just called them out of the blue 5 years ago, well, they sure as hell talk to me if I'm a member of the science board that's funding their work. And so I've been able to talk to these people, and in some cases I've really gotten involved in following what they're doing. And what's really neat is I've come to see that we have funded a number of studies where we ostensibly fund the work to help teenagers in high school environments. But you know, you look at those books, and it's just obvious to me that you take something like, there's a study that just came out called Peers. Now, Peers is a piece of work. It's what they call an evidence-based training package that you would use to put together, say, a group where you took 10 teenagers from the community with Aspergers who had trouble making friends and getting along. You took these 10 kids who didn't know each other, and a therapist or psychologist or some kind of social worker that led the group would use the strategies in the Peers protocol, and he would teach those kids to sort of bond together and form a team. It's not like making lifelong friends out of them, it's making a team, and that's a really vital thing. That's what you do to succeed at work, it's what you do to succeed in the service, it's really the foundation of any kind of social success. And one thing that's really vital, it is the foundation, in my opinion, of bullying prevention. Because all of you know, that deal with people in high school, everyone's concerned about bullying, and you think about who is the target of bullies. The targets are always the outliers, the outsiders, and the purpose of peers is to draw the kids into a pack. So if you succeed in drawing them into a pack, they won't be targets. Even if we are weirdos and freaks and geeks and everything else, we'll be weirdos and freaks and geeks together, and when we're together, we won't be picked on. And it's a really powerful thing. But what I see is that that kind of work is easily translatable into the adult environment. We could be taking those kinds of studies and we could be applying them at work. We could, you could, for example, right here in this college, you could take that peers program and you could adopt it in the human resources department, and you could use it for coworkers that don't get along. You could use it for people who have trouble making friends in the community. All of you who know about adult Asperger groups in your communities, one of you that leads that group, you could take that peers thing and you could use it to bond the people in your group together. The great thing about stuff like that is when the work is funded by either these big nonprofits like Autism Speaks, or when it's funded by the federal government like Centers for Disease Control and National Institutes of Health, all of those funding organizations require the fruits of the work to go into the public domain. So that's a big difference, say, between them and a drug company funding the work. Because if Pfizer funds a study, Pfizer owns it, and Pfizer turns it into medicine, and they sell it, and that's that. But all these other organizations, they do this stuff, and it is all out there and available to any one of you. Any of you could go out there and you could buy the peers workbook, and you could use it right now in your community with grown-ups. You could use it with teenagers. You could use it really with anyone probably over 10 years old. Another thing that I've seen that's really important is what we call flexibility. I sort of wrote about flexibility and looked me in the eye. I didn't really know that was the fancy name psychologists had for it. But those of you who remember my stories in the beginning of that book, you'll recall that when I was a little boy and I was with these other kids on the playground, I saw that those other children were playing with their toys incorrectly. And I thought that by showing them the correct way to use a dump truck or the correct way to arrange Lincoln logs, they would admire me and we would be friends. And unfortunately, that was not a successful strategy. So anyway, I didn't actually know the fancy term for why that didn't work, but I knew it failed. So when my own kid came along, Cubby, I saw Cubby doing the same thing. Now remember, I didn't know about my own Asperger's until Cubby was in the 2nd grade, and I was 40 years old. So when Cubby was that age, I didn't know that I was autistic and I had these deficits that caused me to see things that way. I just knew that I saw my kid doing the same things that I did, and I saw that the same kids that hit me with the trucks were going to hit him with the trucks now 30-some years later. So, I would pick him up and I would hold him at arm's length at a safe distance so he couldn't kick or bite me. And I would say to him, do this instead of that. And then they won't hit you. And then I would lower him to safe distance and drop him. Anyway, Cubby did eventually learn. And thanks to that, Cubby was always tremendously more successful socially than me. But that was a very primitive method of training. Now, thanks to National Institutes of Health, we've got a sophisticated method of training that to young people. So, some of you have read the teaching guides for my book. Are any of you in the teaching racket to where you know about the teaching guides for my books? Not too many of you know about that, I guess. Well, maybe you just don't want to admit you're in the teaching racket. We're an educational institution. Anyhow, when I saw that my books were used in high schools and used in colleges, I got together with the folks at 2 prestigious autism and Asperger schools. I got together with the folks at Monarch School of Houston, Texas, and the folks at Ivy Mount, which is in Rockville, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. Both of them developed teaching guides for both look me in the eye and be different. And the thing that's really cool about those teaching guides is the discussion questions and the information in them was actually thought up by genuine teenage Aspergians. So it was actually developed not just by the teachers in the school, but it was developed by the kids in the program too. And anyway, after we sort of started that collaboration, doing the teaching guide at Ivy Mount drew me in this other thing that they're doing. And I wrote a forward for it. You can actually buy that on Amazon right now too. And that's called Unstuck and on Target. So what that is, Unstuck and on Target is a book that resulted from this NIH-funded study at George Washington University down there that, again, is this evidence-based thing where they tried this protocol on one group of kids, and then they tried a different protocol on another group of kids, and they measured the difference in the two groups of kids' performance to determine whether the strategies worked or not. And Unstuck and on Target is a teaching protocol to sort of teach what the name implies, to teach people to be flexible. It's what you do to teach somebody like my kid that there is more than one way to play with a dump truck, more than one way to arrange Lincoln logs. And, you know, you shouldn't be misled by the title, because when you look at it and you listen to those examples of mine, you think, well, it's a book for little kids. But you know, it's really not. It's funny, when I was writing the forward for the thing, I was reading through it, and I was thinking, boy, this all applied to me. And I realized that once again, we have funded a piece of research for young people, and you could take that Unstuck on Target book, and you could absolutely take that right into your adult Asperger group here in New Jersey, and you could sit there and you could talk about it one chapter at a time in weekly or monthly meetings. And I guarantee you that book has the potential to be life-changing for any one of you who did it. And I think it's very interesting that we're doing a lot of work like that that can benefit a lot more people than really have any idea. Because I bet none of you had any idea that this work was out there and that it could benefit adults or really people in the work environment or whatever. And it really highlights a fundamental problem. When you read what's happening online in the world of autism, you read a tremendous amount of bitching and complaining about how the government either isn't spending enough money or how we are spending the money on all the wrong stuff. There are some people who think we need to spend all our money on vaccines, and some people who think we need to spend it all on genetics. There are some people who think we need to spend it all on adult therapy, and there are some people who think we need to abandon science entirely and spend it all on community outreach. The thing that you get from reading those things is kind of a picture of how autistic disability can be subtle and invisible, and yet it can really get hold of us. Because when you read all those statements of opinion, what are they? But they are absolute statements. You don't read on these blogs that I think we should apportion the research dollars 22, 33, 17, 6, and 15. You don't see that. It should be all vaccine. It should be all genetics. And if you don't understand that it's vaccines, you're just stupid. And you know, I now realize that those statements are themselves manifestations of autistic disability. What is that except a fundamental inability to see the other person's point of view? Now, of course, some of those things are expressed by parents, right? Parents have autistic kids. And when I say, well, the autistic kid had to come from somewhere, oh boy, it gets nasty. You know, you get mad at me all you want, it ain't going to change the genetic research that we're doing. It ain't going to change the outcomes. The evidence that autism is a result of genetic proclivity and some sort of environmental trigger is increasingly overwhelming. And I think what we see in so many of these absolute statements is we see people who may not be themselves disabled, but their ability to recognize other points of view is probably limited by the very same factors that may be leading to more severe autistic disability in their children. And I will concede that that is a point of view that makes many parents angry, but that's too bad, because I believe it to be true, and I believe the science is going to bear me out. And it doesn't matter if it makes you angry or not, because still, what I'm here to tell you is that what we need is moderation. We aren't going to get anywhere by arguing that all our money should be spent on outreach or all of it should be spent on genetics. What we really need is we need more people to go out there and argue for balance. And the other thing that I feel an increasing need to do, pardon me if I'm just rambling, telling you all this crazy stuff. I hope you weren't expecting some more coherent talk, but anyway. One other thing that really concerns me about that is that I've gotten increasingly worried that some of these people who are in the extreme, they are sort of in the extreme autistic disability camp, where they believe that their children who are totally nonverbal, who cannot take care of themselves, represent the real autism. The only autism people like me are a fake, and all of the research money should go towards curing real autism. And those people are increasingly strident in their demands that folks like me be removed from the autism picture so that somebody will speak for these kids who can't speak for themselves. And at first, I dismissed them. And I said, okay, well, if you feel that way, why don't you hold yourself out to the National Institutes of Health as a reviewer? Why don't you go and approach all these organizations? If you think I can't do it, you go do it yourself. I'm not stopping you. And for whatever reason, they haven't done it. And that's sort of how it played for a year or two. But I now realize that those people have a very valid point. And that is that when you look at somebody like me, at my age, I was disabled as a kid. But when I say I was disabled as a kid, I was disabled in the way that the disabled teenagers who are here in audiences like this tonight are disabled. And I think, you know, most of you know what that means. They're kids who could talk fine, but they don't have any friends, they fail in school, they say weird stuff, they do all those things in the DSM manual that describes us as being autistic. I was never a kid who couldn't talk. I was never a kid who had to wear diapers. I was never a kid who smashed my head into the wall until I had to be put into restraints. And I realized that before we had people like me or Temple, other people who have become public faces of autism, the world's perception of autism was really of those nonverbal, severely disabled people. And when you thought autism in 1975, I mean, those of you who are my age, what did you think of as an autistic kid in 75? Remember that television show St. Elsewhere, right? There was that kid Tommy, one of the doctor's kids, and he banged his head on the wall, throw things, and run, and he was, you know, that was an autistic person. So my fear is that by coming out in public view, as I do and as other people do, we are painting a distorted picture. Because you look at me and you see that I'm commercially successful. And you know, and some of you might think, well, I screwed up 3 times and because I got, you know, married repeatedly, and others would think, well, I'm triply successful because I got married repeatedly. And yet I understand that the majority of young people with Asperger's are not in that place. They want a girlfriend, one girlfriend for the first time in their lives. They want one meaningful job for the first time in their lives. They want to graduate from school. And I absolutely believe that what I say to you is true about how we can emerge from disability. when I say that we're different, but we don't have to be disabled, and as we get older, we learn adaptive strategy, and adaptive strategy is what made me so much better and so much more successful over the last 10 years, those statements are absolutely true. But it's really important to me that all of us keep in mind that not everyone will develop or emerge from disability to the point they speak in public, for example, like I do. Many people will emerge from total disability to the point where they are quiet, functional members of the background of their community. Those people will have made tremendous strides to go from being someone who would have been institutionalized to somebody who is working in a stockroom at Whole Foods or whatever. And they're proud that they're working at Whole Foods. Their parents are proud that they're working at Whole Foods. And society as a whole should be proud because that person is making money at Whole Foods and not living in a group home and being supported by the state. Those are great achievements. But the thing is, who's going to speak for that person because he can't speak for himself? And what about the person who can't speak at all? And so, when all of you think about how you express your views about autism and what we need, I would really, really urge every one of you to keep in mind that not only do we need to have balance and moderation in research and so forth, we need to study all these different questions, even if they seem worthless, and even if you think the answers are obvious. These scientists who propose this research, they're not dummies, they're not charlatans for the most part. At least not the people who are proposing it to the National Institutes of Health. And we need to have that kind of balance, but the other thing that we need is all of you have a personal stake in autism, and you're out there talking about life with autism to your friends and your co-workers and people at your schools and stuff. And I would urge you to keep in mind that there is this population of autistic people who can't talk for themselves, and there really are no advocates to speak for them. And those of us who are part of the autistic community, who are more able to speak, I suggest to you that we have a duty to stand up for our more disabled brothers and sisters and help them. And I hope that you'll join me in doing that. So, having told you some of those ideas, I think what I ought to do is see who has questions, and we will see what kind of discussion we might have here. Who wants to be first? Yes. Okay. You're asking what you do if you're here for college?
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Are you asking what would the college do to help somebody like us who's different?
Yes.
That's what you mean?
Yes.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things that we can do. First of all, how old are you? You 16 or so? You're 12? Well, I guess I'm older than blind. I'm sorry. Anyway, a little further from college, but it's okay. So I got me this kid, Cubby. And Cubby's in college now. And Cubby, some of you who follow my blog, you know that Cubby has special interests like me. My special interest was electronics and music, and Cubby's is chemistry.
Oh.
And every kid is interested in chemistry, wants to either make drugs or explosives, and my kid wanted to make explosives. So anyway, the federal government raided it. We had like a little Ruby Ridge or Waco right there on my street. And as you can imagine, that was very stressful what I'm saying for Cubby. And Cubby flunked out of school. Cubby is now back on track, and he's transferred into the University of Massachusetts to be a senior, I hope, next year. There's two pieces of advice that I would give you as a young fellow who's heading for college. The first thing I would say to you is that I wrote that yellow you got a girlfriend, and when I turn the next page, you had a job. Now, I want to know how to do that stuff. And for everyone who said that to me, I wrote that yellow book. And I took every one of those questions like that, and I took every trait of autism and Asperger's, and I wrote some stupid story in my life that illustrates how that trait affected me and shaped my life. And my hope is that folks like you can read those stories, and you can sort of read it, you can say, well, you know, maybe Robison did that, maybe I could do this. And I wrote that as a manual to help young people learn how to fit in. The most vital thing that you can do is become part of the pack. That's why we funded that peers research that I talked about earlier. That's one of the key goals in Writing Be Different, to help young people be part of the pack. And if you are part of the pack, you will succeed in college and you'll succeed in life. Being part of the pack is more important than learning calculus or learning medieval history or learning almost anything else. If you become a member, if you become a member of a tribe, the tribe will protect you and take care of you. That's really, really important. And the next thing that I would say to you is that when you get to be 15 or 16 years old, you need to start looking around for geek-friendly communities. Sometimes people ask me, like, what college would be good for geeks like us? And, there's so many colleges that you could go to, there's no way I could know them all. I mean, I can name some places, I can say, sure, you can go to MIT, and half the people, two-thirds of the people in engineering school probably have Asperger's. But the thing is, there are little enclaves of geeks probably at every single university and college in this country. Like here at this school, I don't know where the geeks are, but somebody must know where they are. And so you've got to really look around. You've got to decide what you're interested in, and then you've got to start asking around to see if your interest is in marine biology, or your interest is in English history, or it's in military strategy, or whatever. You need to find where the geek-friendly places are that study that. So those are the two important things I would suggest to you. Yes?
To ask you what you think works best for bad behavior.
She's asked what I think works best for bad behavior with Asperger's. Well, I think what works the best for bad behavior with Asperger's is the progression of street, gutter, jail. And parents do not like that. But the thing is, I go into so many schools today, and I look at young people who behave really badly. And when I observe that behavior, the teacher says to me, well, he's autistic, or well, he's got Asperger's, as if that excuses, throwing stuff and knocking chairs over and, just doing stuff like that. And I listen to that, and I think these people are crazy. Because when you allow your 12-year-old or 13-year-old or 14-year-old or 15-year-old to do that kind of stuff, one day school is going to come to an end. And he's going to go out in the real world. And he's going to sit down at the bar in Chili's, and he's just going to knock the drink over for the guy next to him. The guy's going to turn around and beat hell out of him. And then the cops are going to come, he's going to mouth off at the cop, and he's going to get arrested. And it's going to go from being, he can't do any different because he's got Asperger's, to he has landed his ass in jail. And I think that the lesson to be taken away from that is if we can't teach young people the basics of behavior at age 13 and 14, society is going to teach them to us at age 18 or 19, and it is going to be a singularly unpleasant experience. So as disagreeable as you think it is, I would say that's what we have to do. And I'm not telling you that we have to teach perfect manners. I'm not telling you we have to teach fake behavior. I don't think any of us should be fake. I would never say to you, look at somebody and when she comes in the room, say, oh, you look pretty today. All I'm saying is, learn some basic rules. You know, you teach your kid that when they walk up to a door and there's a bunch of people coming, you step up and you just hold the door open. You just do that. It doesn't matter who's there and whether they're boys or girls or what they say, you just do that. There is no emotion in there, there's no reading, there's no subtlety of body language. It is a simple rule. See door, open door, stand there. And then you teach them things like shower, bath, every 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. You've got to teach that. It's got to get hammered into us at an early age. Because if it's not hammered into us at an early age, it goes from being something that makes the girls laugh at us in 7th grade to being something that says, there's no way I'm going to hire that pig at age 19. And it goes from being something that's ridiculous to something that's being crippling. And I firmly believe that that is something that we can teach. I alluded to that in my Be Different book. One of the things I talk about in Be Different, because I didn't understand it really when I wrote Look Me in the Eye, is that there is a big difference between learning how to not make enemies and how to make friends. See, making friends can often require subtle emotional insight that people like me don't have at age 14. You know, we can't look at that girl there and decide she thinks I'm nice and she's laughing at a text message and she thinks I'm ridiculous. We don't know which is which. So, making friends with those 3 people, we can't pick which one wants to be our friend. But what we can do is we can learn to step aside and hold the door open for all of them, and what that will do is it will guarantee that if we keep our mouth shut and we hold the door open, we will not be any of their enemy. And that is a really, really, really important thing. I think that my generation, people who are in their 50s and older, we learned how to not make enemies because we all went to school in packs and we had playground recess together. And in the 50s and 60s, kids were allowed to beat each other up on the playground. And the thing is, you know, you laugh at that, but I believe there is a lesson there. And the lesson is that when 4-year-olds beat each other up, 4-year-olds can't hurt each other. So when you restrain that behavior and you don't let the 4-year-olds beat each other up, then you get a situation where 16-year-olds come to school with knives and they kill each other. Because that was unheard of when the 4-year-olds beat each other up on the playground. And when you got beat up at age 4, you didn't want to get beat up at age 6 or 8 or 10, and you changed your behavior. And I absolutely believe we got to do that. And I believe we can, yes.
So I don't remember which book, but I remember that you said that what motivated you to kind of work harder was the desire for a girlfriend.
Yep.
So what you're talking about now with all this external conditioning by parents versus the internal desire to make change, like how can we prod our kids towards kind of internalizing that desire?
So she's just asked me, how can we prod kids to want to change? First of all, there was a time when my own kid actually wanted to please Dad, and he would, you know, just do what I said because I said so. You know, when he's about 4 years old, I had him trained to say, "Please, wondrous Dada, may I have a drink?" So, and you would never get that kind of cooperation and politeness out of a 12-year-old. But I had him trained then. And so the first answer to your question is, if you start this early enough in life, you have a big leg up and you can train them early. But I have actually written a number of chapters in the Be Different book that speak to that very question. One of the chapters that I have in there is called A Reason to Care. It talks about me getting a first girlfriend, and this I was about 19 years old at the time, and it was the possibility of a girlfriend that made me take baths and clean up my torn, you know, clothes and stuff like that. So that absolutely gave me a powerful incentive to change how the world saw me. And I think that that same desire provides a teaching incentive for other young people. And there's a thing that goes hand in hand with that is also in Be Different. And I've called those chapters Becoming Choosable, Getting Chosen. I actually forgot what I named them, but they have the books out there and you can look at the book and see. So anyway, the concept of that is that, as I said a few minutes ago, if I were back there in high school and I looked at those three girls over there in the cafeteria and all three of them were smiling, but one thought I was cute and one was laughing at me and one was just reading a message, and I couldn't tell which was which, what that says to you is, for me to be a chooser, if you ask me to go pick one of those girls and ask her to be my friend, it would be a formula for disaster. Because only one of the three likes me, and the chances are I'll pick the wrong one and I'll make a fool of myself. And that's what happens, and our kids are defeated and they become depressed. So what I advocate, instead of doing that, is learning what behaviors drive people away. And I learned this at age 40, and I know it works, because this is what made such a powerful transformation in my own social success. By learning what behaviors drove other people away and not doing those behaviors. And then learning some basic behaviors that build you what you might call social credit with people. For example, holding the door open and just letting the people walk by. The people walk by, you don't say a single word to them, but they just look at you and they think, he's a nice guy. So then, if you say something a little weird in the cafeteria, they look at you and you said something weird, but they remember, he was a nice guy, he held the door. So now, all of a sudden, he's not just a jerk. He was a nice guy, he held the door. He did say something weird, but it's okay, he was nice. And you know that works. And so what that does is, if you can turn yourself from being a person who looks like a ridiculous fool to 99% of the school population, if you can just make yourself into a person who only looks like a fool to 90% of the school population, that's 10% of the school that's going to think that you're an okay guy. And how many friends do we need? And you know, that's enough. That's enough to do the job. And I think that learning how to become choosable, that's a powerful thing, because making yourself choosable is based upon logic. It's not based upon this emotional insight that we haven't got. You can become choosable by following logic-based rules. So again, I believe we can teach choosability to any teenage boy, where teaching them to choose another person successfully is a very, very tall order, even in adulthood. And while we are on the subject of choosability, because I know that some of you have people in your lives with autism that are boys, and some of you have people that are girls. And so what you might wonder then is, what does this choosability idea mean if you're a girl? And if you're a girl, I'm sorry to say that I don't really have a good set of answers for you, but I have a caution for you. When I go and speak to colleges, and I speak to young people in colleges like this, where I get 20, 30 people with Asperger's and they're like in a room talking, when you talk to guys with Asperger's at college, the guys will all say, I want to learn how to get a date. I want to have a date. I want to have sex. Well, they don't want dates, they want sex. And every guy will say that. They don't have bad dating stories. They have no date stories. They fail at it and they want to succeed. And whether succeeding is girlfriend, sex, marriage, whatever you want to call it, they're failing and they want success. So then when you go to girls, and you ask a group of girls in the same college setting and you talk to them about the same stuff, they have this nightmarish set of stories about, you know, date rape and all these guys beating them up and all this bad stuff that happens to them. And what I think happens to produce that stark and unpleasant difference between male and female young adults on the spectrum and dating, I think in our society, the female is expected to be the chooser. So if you're a male and you have Asperger's and you act weird, you compromise your choosability and you do not get chosen. Nothing bad happens to you, you just don't get chosen. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good outcome, it's an unpleasant outcome and you're lonely, but it doesn't get you, beat up or raped or anything. If you're a girl, though, and you have to do the choosing, and your ability to choose is flawed, you may choose one of these lounge lizards that will be really bad for you. Because when you're actively making a choice and your choosing ability is bad and you're choosing someone who's bigger and stronger than you, there is a great risk for a bad outcome. And I don't really know what to say to those of you with college and high school age females in your lives as to what to do about that. But I believe it's something that we should be aware of and be thinking of. Yes?
This isn't really about Asperger's itself. It's more about like you.
Yeah.
You know that trick you did with the mannequin and the flames and the fake hands and the rings and the pentagram? Will you tell me more about how you got away with that?
You gotta stand up here for a minute. Now look at this. Isn't this fellow spiffy? Look at him. Right here in front. Okay, sit back down. I'll tell you what in a minute. So the thing about the mannequin, and this is sort of true about all stories. Now look me in the eye book. I still live in Amherst, which is the town where most all those stories took place. And what I don't say in the book there is I stole the mannequin out of the back of the House of Walt's clothing store. Now, I actually, at the time, did not think I was stealing the mannequin that was the property of the store. I actually thought I was carrying off a mannequin that was being thrown out that was next to the dumpster. I mean, there's plenty of times when I stole things and would admit it, but that was not one of them. And so, Mr. Walsh has long since died. Mr. Walsh had a niece, Sandy Kelly, who ran the store for many years after he retired. And Sandy Kelly is a longtime friend of mine. She's about 15 years older than me, and she had an accident, got injured and died about 2 years ago. But she assured me that the mannequin was something that they did want to keep and that I had stolen it. And, but after all that was said and done, she had a framed copy of that story on the wall of her house. And she was so proud of it. She showed it to all her friends, and her daughter's in the FBI, and her daughter had a copy of it. So anyhow, all these people that appear in my stories from back then, the kind of cool thing about being in a small town is they're all here by their real names, and you can look them all up even today. But if you read further in that Look Me in the Eye book, you're a little too young to have been using cocaine. But when I was your age, we had cocaine. Okay, so you saw how I was refining cocaine with my plastic countertop in the engineering lab? Yeah, well, that was a pretty good trick. To get somebody to steal your coke once, but to get somebody to come back 4 times in a row and steal Formica cocaine, now that's good. And, but there again, those people are still my friends. And the other guy that's in that story in the lab, Bob Jeffley, Bob is still one of my best friends today. And Bob actually went on to become a really prolific game inventor. And he actually did some of the Cabbage Patch games, he did the Whack-A-Mole game, he did a bunch of games, after Milton Bradley. So all these people are online, and you can find them all. You can even ask them their versions of these stories. But basically, the way I got away with all of that is I lived in a small town in the 60s, and people just laughed at it, and they said that's just what kids do,
Yeah.
And now we've kind of criminalized everything.
Pentagram and just set them on fire. He was hanging from the telephone line.
Hey, we did worse stuff to speak at this event up in Canada, and this was like the end of this conference. It was all boring. Everybody's like falling asleep, and there I am, and I'm supposed to get up and talk. I'm like the last guy, and I get up there, and everybody's just kind of laying there. It's in Toronto, and I said, you know, the last time I crossed the border here in Toronto, I was in an old Mercedes-Benz truck with a bunch of sound system stuff in the back. When I opened the glove compartment at the border crossing, I found a pound of coke and a gun. And everybody sits up and looks at that. And so all the people in the audience, are all these people from the U.S. National Institutes of Health, the Canadian Ministry of Health, and stuff like that. And it just goes to show, you can tell people any kind of crazy stuff you want, as long as it's 30 years later and statute of limitations. And it wasn't my coke anyhow. It was only a coke in the truck for another thing. So, yes. Yes. Are you asking about like cliques of students, or are you asking about online networking?
The kids that want to get on Facebook that are in middle school.
So she's asking about social networking for middle school Aspergians, I guess, right? I think that concerns about Facebook are probably sort of generalized parental concerns. I don't think it's really like an Asperger thing. It's just a general parent thing. And I think that people who have a weak ability to make friends in real life are more vulnerable to being abused online. And I think that if I had a 12-year-old today and I wanted my 12-year-old to go online and make friends, I would encourage my kid to go to a site like Wrong Planet or some of the youth forums that Autism Speaks has, where they're at least somewhat moderated. And the thing about like the Wrong Planet forums, they're not really moderated very much, but the people there are like all our own kind, right? So you're not going to find people that are like horribly making fun of, well, actually, you do find that. We don't find too much of it. You're not going to, you certainly as a stranger, you're not going to come in there and be ridiculed just because you're a 12-year-old with Asperger's, because everybody else in there has Asperger's. I mean, they may get to know each other and attack each other viciously. They do that. But it is basically a community of like-minded people. And I guess I would encourage you to go there. Yes?
How do you address when you realize that most of those that are Asperger's, they don't have compassion for other people. They don't understand other people. To form a peer group, you find everybody with Asperger's is different than they are. They might have similar traits, but actually my son says he considers the Asperger's social hour as an oxymoron.
Well, the first thing I would say to you is to be blunt, science says that you're wrong. The science overwhelmingly says that people with Asperger's have, if anything, more powerful emotional reactions to stimuli than people who are not autistic. And feelings of compassion are actually responses to some stimuli, right? So, the evidence shows that, for example, if you do a study where you show a bunch of people a video, and in that video, they see a pin being poked through an apple, and then they see a pin being poked through your finger here. Every person who watches that video who's not autistic will flinch the hand that gets pierced. You'll show that to autistic people, and the autistic people won't wince, they won't do anything, they won't flinch. And people react just as you did. They say those autistic people have no compassion, they have no empathy, they don't even care. And
How can you have empathy if it's just a complete stranger anyway?
well, that's an excellent point, and I addressed that in logical empathy and looking in the eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, the kid died on the railroad.
Right, but you gotta be quiet a minute, you'll distract me from answering my question.
Sorry.
So, okay, so So anyway, a person at Harvard Medical School didn't believe that that study meant what it seemed to mean. So what she did is she took skin conductance electrodes and fastened to the people's foreheads. She fastened heart rate monitors to the people, which is sort of like a lie detector test. And she did that same test. And the result was the same. The autistic people didn't show any sign, and the people who weren't autistic flinched and winced. But you know what? The autistic people showed a greater change in skin conductance, and they showed a greater change in heart rate change. And the autistic people maintained the change in skin conductance and the change in heart rate for 2 to 4 times as long as the non-autistic people. What that showed, very powerfully, is that the autistic people were more powerfully, more deeply affected, and perhaps because we have an inability to express the emotion stays inside us longer, and it roils within us more deeply. So the idea that autistic people do not have compassion is flat out wrong. So now, you might then rephrase your question, because I'm sure you asked it with good intentions. You might say, what might I make of the apparent lack of compassion? I think the answer to what might I make of the apparent lack of compassion is this. When your son sees something that happens, just like this young fellow alluded to in the story of the kid getting killed on the railroad track, he might see somebody fall down the street and skin their knee. And you see that same person, you're walking together with him, and you see that, and you look at that kid in the street, and you wince, and your knee hurts, and you feel yourself bleeding, and you think, ooh, that must hurt, that's awful. And you look at your son, and he feels nothing. He shows nothing. Well, first of all, as the study I just described to you suggests, your son may be feeling great distress over what he sees, and you don't even know. And I don't have a secret for how you'll know, because that's part of the disability of autism. He doesn't have a way to show it to you. But the other thing I would say to you is that there have been other studies that have shown that people with autism simply don't respond to certain things that trigger emotional responses in other people. And it's different for different people. So your son might be a person who, if he sees somebody that he doesn't know fall and skin their knee, he might actually feel nothing at all. And so what happens then is when you feel a response and your son doesn't feel a response, that's because your son's autistic. It's not because he's incapable of feeling compassion. It's because the signaling system for that particular event didn't lead to a result of emotion for him. Okay? But when you say to him, what's wrong with you, Michael? Can't you feel that? What you do is you create in him this feeling that there's something the matter with him. And that's a really corrosive thing, and it eats away inside us. And I would urge you not to do that. And I would urge you to try and explore, because you're going to find that there are situations where your son will show no response, but he will have a deep feeling. And your son may or may not be able to express that to you because that's a component of autistic disability. And then there are other situations where your son genuinely feels nothing. But you, as a person who's not autistic, you feel something. And in those circumstances, the best thing you could do for your son as a parent is you could say, that is a situation, Michael, or whatever his name is, where you should do this. You should go over to him and you should say, can I help you? Even though you don't feel distressed, even though you don't feel there's anything wrong, you should do that, because that's like holding the door for somebody. That will cause people to feel that you are a nice guy and it won't hurt you to do it. So that would be the best thing I can say to you. And I hope you understand that even though I was critical, that I was given in good faith. Should we take more questions, or what should we do?
How about maybe 3 more questions, and then we do have a book table outside where both books that you mentioned are available.
Okay, so before we do the 3 questions, I would just say that all of you can follow me in my Facebook community, which is Facebook.com/John Elder Robison. You can type John Elder Robison into Google and you find my blogs and stuff like that. So I have an signing books and stuff. I forgot what the other thing I was going to say was. Okay, so these got to be really good questions because it's only going to be 3. So you there in the corner. What's up? She's asked what it was like for me leaving home for the first time, and was it hard for me? It was absolutely hard for me leaving home for the first time, but there are a couple of things that sort of tempered that. First of all, my home life was very dysfunctional. My brother first wrote about our home life in Running with Scissors, and I didn't really portray the full extent of the depravity of my family's life when I was a kid. If you read Running with Scissors, you will kind of see that most of the characters in that play would go to state prison for much of the rest of their lives if it happened today instead of 35 years ago. So I didn't really have a lot of good stuff to leave behind. And secondly, when I left home as a total nothing failure. I was getting straight F's in school. My father was drunk. He was mean. He wanted to beat me up all the time. You know, my mother was crazy. The school told me I was good for nothing. I was going to go to jail. And there I was, and I had got me a job that paid me $80 a week to be a roadie for a local band. And I was proud as could be of that. You know, I had a job, and I had a community of people that wanted me, and then I had all these people at home that didn't want me. So that made it a lot easier for me to leave than if I'd come from maybe a happier environment. So let's see, I gotta look around here. Okay, her, there.
Do you feel that your Asperger's was maybe inherited from either one of your parents?
She's asked, I think my Asperger's was inherited from either one of my parents. Well, as you heard me say earlier tonight, whenever I see Aspergian kids, I do all I say, I had to inherit it from somewhere. And yes, I do think that. I think that my father displayed Aspergian traits, and my uncles on both sides of the family, actually going back as far as I can follow back, were what you would call eccentric, or you might call them weirdo freaks. And so I think that there is significant evidence that there is what we would now call Asperger's today in my family, and of course it's present in my son. And one of the things that I write about in the Be Different book is the concept of this spectrum where you have people who are so different from the norm that they are disabled by that difference, they fail at something in early childhood, and they get a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's generally when they're in nursery school through middle school. So those are the people who are actually diagnosed. But there are millions and millions of people who grew up with many of those traits of geeky difference, but they weren't quite so different so as to be disabled to the point where they got a disability diagnosis. And I would call those people proto-Aspergians. So if you have a child with Asperger's, and you think, well, I don't have Asperger's, what I would say to you is, think again. Maybe what you are is you are a proto-Aspergian. And I would say another thing that's worth thinking about is this concept that they have this concept of like-kind mating in evolutionary psychology. And maybe so there's 2 of you in a family and you've produced this child with Asperger's, and perhaps you have no observable Asperger traits. Maybe your husband is sort of geeky, and he is a proto-Aspergian guy, but maybe what you have is you have a predisposition to be attracted to that kind of person. And that may be sort of a proto-Aspergian trait too. That's the kind of thing that science is going to take years and years to unravel, but I believe that logic suggests it could well be true. So, let's see, I'll take a question more on this. How are the fellow back here in the back?
First I would say I find you to be a very big inspiration for me. I read your book when I was 17, and I just graduated from university and working as an engineer for a Lockheed Martin. So the question I want to ask you though is, in terms of somebody like me trying to get involved in the community,
asked what he could do to go out and help other young people growing up like us, my son is doing that. Alex is doing that. Some of the other people that are on the Planet community are doing it. What I would suggest you do, first of all, if you were to call up Yale School or any of these special needs schools, and I don't know what the schools may be here in New Jersey, but I'm sure there are a number of schools for Asperger kids. I'll bet you if you called any of them and you said, you know, I'm a local kid with Asperger's and now I've got a job as a systems engineer and I'd be interested in talking to your students, they would love to have you. Not only would I think they would love to have you, but I think if your employer got wind of it, they'd be proud of that too. I don't know that I would reveal that to the employer right away, but I certainly think that to go to a school and say you'd like to do that, they would be delighted to have you. If you wanted to do this on a larger scale, and this applies to any of you, if you were to go to wrongplanet.net, Alex Plant is a 25-year-old Aspergian who didn't have any friends. When he was 17 years old, he created this online community, Wrong Planet, to try and meet people. And it has grown into the biggest internet community for autistic people in the world. It gets almost 4 million page views a month now. It's just shocking. You go there, and there's thousands of people connected to the site, the forums, 24 hours a day. Go on there and look at the Autism Talking projects and write Alex or write my son Cubby, who's Jack Robison, or write Kirsten Winsmith, Cubby's girlfriend. Write any of them on Wrong Planet. Write Scotty Holman, who's on there, and tell them that you're another fellow their age and you're interested in helping out too. And I think that's a means by which all of you guys of this generation